Well, ALF listeners, I know that Giant Trevally are one of those species that many of you get really excited about. And right now, as we move into the cooler months of the year, well, that's a great time to target GT. Not because the GT suddenly come on the chew. They're available all year round in most parts of northern Australia. But as anybody who's chased GT knows, it's a pretty brutal affair. And to do it during the hotter months of the year when you've not only got a genuine battle on your hands with one of the ocean's greatest thugs, but you've also got heat and humidity and exposure to the sun can be really tough on anglers. So as we move into those cooler months, the fishing becomes much more pleasant. So it's really quite timely to head to central Queensland, in fact to the Whitsundays area, in search of the mighty GT. Before we do that though, just a reminder that nothing comes for free. And in fact, the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast comes at a cost in terms of time and money to put episodes together every week. So if you want to support the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast, then I'd really appreciate that. You can jump over to team.lures at team.doclures.com, team.doclures.com. And for the less than you'd pay for a pint of beer once a month at the local, you can get access to all of the members-only content, audio masterclasses, live stream tutorials, all kinds of stuff, ebooks and more tackle deals all over at Team.Lures. And you'll be supporting the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast and helping to keep new episodes coming out week after week. I'd love your support, so folks, go and check out Team.Lures. The guys over there, the members, are my favourite people on the planet, next to my immediate family, of course. So team.doclures.com, go and check it out now. But folks, let's get into today's episode of the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast.
This is the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast, where our mission is to help everyday sports fishers experience extraordinary lure fishing. If next level fishing is your dream, then let us provide the tools and information that will bring that dream to life. Tune in as our expert hosts chat with Australia's best anglers and share their tips for success. Then check out our website. It's one of Australia's largest and most popular online fishing resources. But right now, settle in to listen as ALF founder Greg Doc Lures Vinyl delivers today's episode through the nerdy lens of a scientist, lure maker, and sport fishing tragic.
Folks, welcome to another episode of the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. And I'll tell you what, we are going to go and get a bit of a workout today. We're going to work out the back, we're going to work out the shoulders, the biceps, the whole kit caboodle, because we're going to go and chase GTs in the Whitsundays area. And to help us do that, we have Jack Avery on board. So, Jack, welcome to the show, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My absolute pleasure, mate. Been looking forward to this chat for a little while. You've been fishing the Whitsundays area, more than a decade, I believe, or around a decade.
So this year it'd be 10 years.
10 years, a decade of fishing for GT and other species in the Whitsundays. And, mate, you're telling me that you used to go out to the outer reef a fair bit, but these days you're just as happy to fish the islands and the inshore reefs and those sorts of areas, headlands, places where the GTs are in close.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think luckily with where based here, we get a better run of fish closer to the coast. If you want to catch numbers, out to the reef.
Okay.
And you'll basically catch as many as you want.
Okay. But the quality fish are in close, you're saying?
I definitely think that the larger fish that you want to target are definitely based more towards the coast.
Right, okay. Well, that's got me excited straight away because that opens this style of fishing up to a lot of people who maybe don't have such a large boat and can't get out to the outer reef at the drop of a hat. So, mate, we're going to get on to talking about GT fishing in just a moment. But first, I'd just like to spend a bit of time getting to know you and introducing you to our audience. So let's go through a few sort of bucket list questions and find out a bit more about what makes Jack Avery tick. Obviously, GTs, they're one of your key species you like to target, but, mate, Mackay, Whitsundays, Central Queensland, so many species. What else do you like to go and throw lures at when you're not chasing GTs?
Oh, so I've been dabbling in obviously the jigging for the last 4 or 5 years. We've had really good luck getting pretty consistently bigger size finger mark, and we've even managed to knock over big reds pretty quickly. Wow. And then obviously, like whenever you're fishing for them, you get a lot of bycatch, your nannies, your trout, and all that stuff. So yeah, we're pretty spoiled up here. I don't think it's by skill. I just think it's by nature of where I am.
Where you fish, yep.
We happen to put the right lures in front of the right fish pretty consistently when we
good stuff.
crack at it.
Yep. Now, mate, it's hard to imagine why you would want to go somewhere else to fish, given what you've just told us. But if you could just take a week off and head off to some other part of Australia for nothing else but fishing, leave your computer and your phone behind, just you and a fishing rod, where would you go and why?
Oh, for me, if it was restricted to Australia, I would just want to target marlin or yellowfin tuna.
Okay.
So wherever they were on the east coast at the time, most probably lean towards yellowfin.
Yes.
I would just go there and chase them.
Okay. Do you have a favourite yellowfin spot that obviously, like you say, that depends on time of year, but is there a particular location you'd like to go and hit at a particular time of year?
I used to, when I lived in Sydney, I'd just look at wherever the currents were,
Yes. Yep.
would have them, and I would just go to
Yep.
where I thought they would be. So
Yep.
I did a bit of it in Vanuatu when I was there. We spent a day just top water fishing for yellowfin, and
Nice.
it's one of the funnest. They're the best fish ever.
Yep. They certainly turn it on. They're a bullet when you hook them. They strip some line. So, mate, is there a species that you haven't caught yet that you'd really like to tick off your bucket list? There's plenty of opportunity in Mackay, but what's one you haven't caught?
I haven't caught a big dogtooth tuna, and when I say a big dogtooth tuna, I mean I've never caught one over 15 kilos. But I've never caught. I'd love to get one over 50 kilos. That'd be a really good fish for me. I don't know how much luck you'd have doing it here unless you're going like a long way offshore. But countries like Vanuatu, Fiji and stuff like that, it's a lot more accessible. So I'd love to do a trip targeting big doggies.
Big doggies. Yep. Yeah, you and me both, mate. When you do that trip, give me a yell. I might tag along and help.
No problem.
All right, mate. Do you have a favourite piece of fishing tech or a favourite gadget, piece of electronics or whatever that you'd like to recommend to us?
Oh, just my sounder. I mean, I've got two of them, but I just run like a standard Simrad brand sounder. I don't think it's the newest one. It's probably the one before that. And how good these high-low frequency transducers mix with them these days. It's
phenomenal. Yep.
I literally can pull up to a spot, and if I'm fishing for finger mark on it, and I can see if there's finger mark on it, and I can define, go, oh, that's a finger mark there.
Yes.
And we've caught fish doing that. Literally going, oh, there they are. Set up the drift, get the lure on top of them, and take the fish off them. And then we've even had it so much so that you'll go back after taking one or two fish off the spot, and the one or two archers that were there, they're in the boat now. So it is the tech these days is so good with all that stuff.
Yep, absolutely. Mate, if you could spend a day out fishing with absolutely anybody and just like casting lures at GTs, having a bit of a yarn, slinging some banter, that sort of stuff, who would you like to spend a day out on the water with?
Well, I'm lucky. The people that I go with, like currently, I either fish by myself or I fish with probably one other person, like two other people. So it's either me or my mate Brooksy, who I always enjoy fishing with him. But we've known each other now for 11 years, so it's super easy for me to go fishing with him. And then, that's probably it. I don't, aside from fishing, I used to fish with my wife a lot, but now that we've got kids and whatnot, it's a bit harder.
Gets a bit harder to do that, yeah. And look, Brooksy's been on the show as well in the past talking about GT fishing. Surprise. Folks, go and have a listen to Brooksy's episode as well. All right, mate. One last question before we really get serious about this interview. Tell us about your favourite memory of catching a GT. This might be your personal best or it might be some other story, just a really hard-earned fish, but tell us about your favourite memory.
My favourite memory is I've got three, but I think the standout one would be I went fishing one day with my brother-in-law who doesn't do too much fishing up here. And I said, we'll just go out to the channel and we'll just chip away at this jigging. I want to see. I found a heap of marks probably 6 months prior coming back in from fishing a reef out there that I'd never fished.
Yep.
And I never really fished them. I just marked them on the way in. And I said, we'll just see if there's any reds around these things. There's got to be. I'd love to get one on a jig. I've never caught a big one. Anyway, we went out there and we just had this day. Every spot we went to, there was fish on it. It was loaded. And we end up catching reds. And I caught a big, like what I say, big red. It was like, I think just cracked 10 kilos. That was my first one ever on a jig. We let a heap go, which are great because the reds obviously can release. And then the weather just went to pus. It was blowing like 20, 25 knots southeast. It had come through way earlier than what they thought. And I said, we'll go in, but we'll have to go past this. We'll come on the leeward side of this island. And we're coming in and he goes, oh, it'd be nice to have a break. I go, I've got a GT spot in here, but it's usually tiny fish. I've never seen a fish on it bigger than 15 kilos, but I will have a cast and just see what's going on. Anyway, I pull into this spot. I take out my GT rod, and I think I only had my PE8 rod in the boat because we weren't really fishing for GT. I lob a cast in, and I go, oh, wow, that's a bigger fish than 15 kilos. And I'm looking at these packs of fish coming over it, but there was one fish in there, and I'm going, oh, wow. And he's standing right next to me, and the leader gets in the first run of the guide. So there's only, say, 3 foot of the line off it. And this thing comes up and just inhales the lure at the boat. And I end up just sitting, not lay down, but sat hunched in the boat and loaded the rod up so much. I was like, oh, either the rod snaps or I get wrecked because it's only really shallow. It's 12 meters. And I end up knocking that fish over, and it was a proper monster. It was like well in excess of 40 kilos. So that was one that I just didn't expect to see that fish. And it wasn't a GT thing. And if you ask anyone that spends a lot of time chasing these fish up here, any fish north of 35 kilos is a cracker. You probably only see 5 or 6 fish like that in a year. So to kind of feel like it's like when you have a good hole on the golf course that you started poorly, like you got one back.
Yes.
Like all the times I've gone out chasing them and haven't seen them, I feel like I got one back from the ocean that day. So that's probably one of the better ones I've had, just in a sense of getting given a fish that released was perfect. We managed to, I would never want to hook it on that setup anyway. I think I only had 150-pound leader on. So that one's the win.
What a great story and a great way to start off the interview, mate. So appreciate that tale. All right, let's have a chat about some of the things that you learned about GT fishing. I mean, a decade targeting GTs in your part of the world. What's something you've discovered that perhaps the average angler might not know or understand about GT fishing in central Queensland?
So I think the biggest thing for us up here is the weather. So the weather is typically awful in this part of the world. You get some pretty good runs of weather on the back end of winter, just before it comes into summer. And then if you can line it up, so for starters, if you have good weather and you're in this neck of the world, you just go fishing. Like that's the best way to sum it up. But the things that'll make it work better for you or you have more success is if you can link it up with the right moon. The moon basically dictates everything in this neck of the world for fishing. And if you have a poor moon or you have neap tides or you have stuff like that, get the spearfishing gear out because you are going to struggle.
Okay. All right. So walk us through that in a little bit more detail, mate, in terms of for somebody who's perhaps planning a trip to Mackay or to central Queensland, or somebody who lives in that part of the world and is thinking about going out chasing GTs, what advice would you have about which phases of the moon to target them?
Okay. Typically, you want the lead up to what I would call the new moon. That is only a personal preference, and I'm lucky enough to have this from being able to, a long time ago, fish with some very knowledgeable people about this stuff. It's by no means something that I figured out. It's something that I put into practice and I figured out definitely works. There is so much truth behind this. So when you're fishing the Whitsunday region, you need to understand whenever you're coming into a new moon or you're a full moon or something like that, which I personally stay away from the full moon. I think it's too proactive for sharks. I think sharks love a full moon. So if you're jigging on a full moon, you'll definitely get more action on the jig side of it, but the sharks will just be shocked.
Clean you up.
So with this region, one of the big things, when you have those moons, you have huge tides.
Yes.
I mean, where I live, we have 6 meter tide.
Yes.
So if you don't have good weather, it's going to be real bad. And obviously that's going to change stuff. If you're somebody who likes setting up a drift, you're going to drift at like 3 knots.
Yes.
So you're going to be absolutely ripping through here. But for the topwater stuff and pressure edge stuff, it's perfect because those bigger tides, where on a neap tide, you might have 3 or 4 edges that pick up current at work. Now that you've got a 6 meter tide, you just double how many edges you've got.
Yes.
The spot that only works in a 6 meter tide, that might not get any run on a 3 meter tide.
Yeah. Yep.
So, and I think for somebody that's going to these areas that wants to be successful in targeting these fish, you need to have as many spots you can fish as possible.
Yep. Okay. Cool. And yeah, presumably you can figure a fair few. Let me start again. Presumably, if you're diligent with your navionics and your Google Earth, that sort of stuff, you'll be able to pick a fair few spots out and put marks on them before you go out there and figure out these are places that are likely to get a fair bit of run during those big tides and worth a bit of a look. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's the worst kept secret or if people don't use it, but in Queensland, we actually have a website called Queensland Globe.
Yes.
And you can go onto that and it will give you way better imagery than Google Earth ever will. And I don't know how often they update the Google Earth website. However, the Queensland Globe is a government-based thing and they spend meticulous amounts of time in pumping the right information into these things. And honestly, if basic like marine stuff on an ebb tide, on a flooding tide, all this stuff, which way the current runs. So if you're looking at an image and you go, oh, wow, look at that, and you see where the water's running out to, you can tell exactly what tide it's on. Oh, that's on the run out.
Yeah.
So you just mark that on your navionics, what run out spot, bang. And then, it's a run out in the morning that we're going out there. Let's try this spot first.
Go and check it out. Yeah, great stuff. And pro tip, we talk about Queensland Globe a fair bit on the show, and most of the other states have got similar sort of thing, by the way. So whichever state you're in, if you're fishing for any species, you can get a lot of the mapping, satellite imagery. It's more up-to-date, sharper, higher resolution than what Google Earth is from government websites. But one of the things with Queensland Globe is you can go through past imagery as well, and so you can see a spot on various different tides. So if you see something, a piece of structure that might look like it's interesting, you can go and look back at previous imagery and match that up to tides and figure out whether it's a run in or run out tide, how big the tide was, and it'll give you a pretty good indication of where to fish. So really cool stuff. Mate, in terms of if you're a tugboat operator, so you understand the seas, but if you could wave your magic wand and go, right, I'm going to turn today into the perfect opportunity for GT fishing. We've already talked about tides and moons, but in terms of weather conditions, water clarity, temperatures, cloud cover, wind, all those kinds of stuff, what makes a perfect day for GT fishing?
Unfortunately, which I've found as well with yellowfin, is I find these fish typically more prone, the larger fish, to eat a top water lure when there is actually a little bit of wind.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you didn't have to get flogged, you just have 10 to 15 knots everywhere. But, but for me now, if I was to go fishing, I wouldn't want that. I just want to be able to cruise out there with my 8-knot variables. And it's like anything. If you can lure me up a tide change around a sunrise or something like that, like a low light period. So let's say you had a tide change from a high tide to a low tide, run out starting at 5 o'clock in the morning. I know I can launch really early, beat the crowds. So I'll launch at like 4:15, and I'll start fishing the second there's enough light. That might even still be a little bit early for the tide change because you want it to have a bit of run on it for a bit so these fish can get into the spots. And they're more willing to eat when that water does start ripping through there.
Yes.
They might sit on an edge in a neap tide with no run, and unfortunately, they just won't eat any.
Yep.
So,
and how often, there's lots of different species fall into this category as well, but how often is it that you get perfect champagne glass out conditions? They're never the best conditions for fishing. It's always better to have some run and some ripple to fire the fish up. Mate, walk us through your kind of strategy for the day. If you're heading to a spot that you haven't fished before or you're not that familiar with, tell us about what a good pressure edge looks like. Tell us about how long you'd spend on a spot casting at fish before you'd move on to the next pressure edge or whatever. Give us a bit of an idea of how we should structure our day.
So if I'm going to an area that's new for me and I've marked out a bunch of spots in a specific area, I treat GT fishing like squid fishing. So they're not there in 10 minutes. I'm out of there. I'm off to the next spot because I feel like I need to cover as much ground on that tide as I can to basically know, how come the fish have moved in here? Or like, how come they're off here? And funnily enough, there's areas that I never, ever would have thought to get these fish. And I mean more like back eddies after current spots, like on the back of islands.
Okay. Yep.
And you'll find that they'll actually push in there. Like they'll get in and actually get, and I think it's just because the bait ends up getting
washed in there. Yeah.
Yep. So these fish will end up in there and they'll be in 5 meters of water.
Yep.
And you're like, it's
pretty hard to get out of it. Shallow water though.
You lose a lot of gear
Yeah.
doing this, especially on the islands. I took a bunch of mates out fishing. They actually went out there and stayed there for the night. And I said, I haven't been reefed by a GT in, God, mate, like 3 or 4 years. Like, it doesn't happen these days. The next hookup, I got reefed.
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
was so off it, I was about to jump in the water and get the lure back because out of principle of not losing a lure for so long. Yeah, but that's if I was to go to a whole new area, I would basically have a really good idea of what the current was going to do. I'd have a really good idea of where it was going to hit. And then the best thing to do is get out there and actually just see what you caught and then what is happening in front of you. And if the fish aren't there after 10 or 15 minutes, but you've got a spot 2, 3, let's say a kilometre up the road,
Yep.
I'd say go to that.
Get out of there and get there.
If the fish are on that spot, but they're not on the one you were, and you just spend an hour and a half throwing lures for nothing, one, with the fishing we're doing, you're wrecked.
Yes.
And I feel like the sooner you get one of these things in the boat in any fish, like the sooner you tick one off and you've got it done, they seem to come a lot easier. Once you tick that one for the day, you're like, okay, we're on the board. Let's keep moving forward here and try rack up some numbers.
Yeah, and I think so often as well that those first few casts are the ones that work. If the fish are there and they're going to hit a lure and you don't get a fish in those first few casts, well, you've already alerted them that you're there and they've seen the lure a couple of times. And so it only gets harder from there. It's not a bad strategy. I think you've got plenty of options to move around till you find fish that are active. Mate, in terms of bait, what are these fish typically eating? Do you look for bait on these pressure edges, or do you fish a pressure edge where you haven't seen fish, provided there's bait there? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so naturally, again, and it probably changes where you go, but if you're at the reef, you can have I can, on the right time, in the right time, if you go to an edge that's getting hit with good current, has fused leers on it, you're going to catch GTs. It's just a given. And fish the bait. That's how you're going to do it. But on the coast, we still have fusies, we still have all the regular stuff, but we get a bait. I forget the name of it. It almost looks like a horse mackerel or like a big yakka. But they're bigger. I think I used to know the name of them, but I forget the name of them. And GTs love them.
Right.
They love them. So if you're in a place like a frigate mackerel, if you're in a place where there's a lot of these, you are in the right spot for a better caliber fish.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of your strategy, once you reach a spot, do you typically, you're going up current, killing the donk, drifting down and making casts and then back around and up current again? How does that work? Or do you like to try and hold station and put a lot of casts in?
Since I've fished 90-odd% of the time by myself, I don't get the luxury of, I really need to get 1 or 2 really good casts before I come back on and move in the boat in the position I need to have it.
Yep.
So it's a bit trickier for me, but the longer you can keep the lure in that area, whether it's the front of the pressure edge, because these fish will sit a long way off the pressure edge as well. So definitely don't drive in front of it, because you could have pushed fish on it that were there. Yep. So definitely there's nothing wrong with starting a bit further out, especially if you're fishing with stick baits. Yes. Starting further off the edge, I think, is always a good thing. And even when you're on the edge, a cast back out into the deep, like the amount of times you'll pick a fish up on the back of edges and stuff like that is crazy. So
just cover the whole area as intensely as you can by the sounds of it.
Well, I think if you were to say it is, if you wanted to be meticulous, work from the outside in. But if you had a time restraints, I'd just say get it straight into where you want it and fish hard where you think the fish will be 90% of the time.
Okay, cool. Mate, let's switch tack here a little bit and talk about tackle, because these are a fish that require some pretty serious gear. So walk us through basic rod, reel, line, leader combinations. What would you suggest that we take with us there?
So I think I used to fish really heavy all the time to catch one specific fish, which was a big GT. But you don't see enough of them to justify PE10 gear in my mind now.
Yep.
And I think the heaviest rod you'll need here is a PE8 setup, because the bulk of the fish you're going to catch are going to be between probably 15 to 25 kilos. Okay. That's the reality of it. That's not to say you can't come out here and hook a 50 kilo GT. You could definitely do that, but a PE8 rod will still catch that fish.
Yes.
But if you're fishing PE10, catching 15 to 25 kilo GTs, all that pressure that rod's taken to absorb is going back onto the angler because it just doesn't bend.
Yeah.
So you're going to be pretty exhausted after 3 fish of that size real quick.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I think anybody who would say, oh, what do you think? I think PE6 to 8, realistically, I don't know the real sizes these days between the top major brands, but I just run 18K Stellas, which is plenty. Then outside of that, I know that a lot of the guys that were getting into this that wanted to go a bit cheaper, what are they, 14,000 Saragosas and stuff like that.
Okay. Yep.
The really good reels. I don't know if it's just a handful of bearings that are different in them, and maybe the drag pressure, but they're still a great reel and great for a fish at 18 to 25 kilos.
Yep.
I know of guys that have hooked really big fish on those old Saragosas and blew them up.
Yep. It's going to happen with these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, look, everybody wants to chuck big stuff every now and then. So if you want to chuck a P10 rod, go for gold, but you're going to get flogged, isn't it?
Yeah. And in terms of rod actions and that sort of thing, obviously, you might look for a different action if you're throwing stick baits and if you're throwing poppers or whatever. What advice would you have there?
Yeah. So obviously, the lighter the rod, the better you're going to be able to work a stick bait. I mean, I work all my stick baits with a PE8 rod. There is a handful of stick baits that are out there that you can work with a PE10 rod, but just not as well. But yeah, I think it's just figuring out which ones are good for you. I'm pretty stuck in my ways. I just throw particularly big lures. That's all I really like throwing is big lures. No, there's nothing in it other than I like big lures.
Big lures, yeah.
It's the aesthetic. I love it. So, but you can have success on anything that you want. But for me, the bigger the lure, I'm pretty happy to throw them.
Yeah. And let's face it, the next GT that comes along and eats a 3-inch soft plastic that was intended for a big Giant Trevally or something like that won't be the last one. I've said that a few times, so all good. But in terms of lines and leaders, can you give us a few tips on what you suggest there?
So if you're fishing like bigger scale fish, 200-pound leader plus to kind of 220, I used to use, I think it was Sunline leader, and then 150-pound for my PE8 stuff. Just again, lighter the leader, I feel like I can get a little bit better action on those stick baits, and 150 pounds heaps. You just got to change it more regularly. Like it won't have as much give if you get it nicked, or up here, unfortunately, we get a lot of long toms. So if one of them grabs your line, you're going to have to change it.
Yeah, yep. And line to leader connection, mate, PR knot or FG?
To be honest, going through all of it now, just use an FG knot.
Okay.
It's the best knot ever.
Yeah, my favourite as well. But I know a lot of the GT guys do swear by the PR.
Yeah, look, I think it goes down to what you've grabbed the spool with in the past and hasn't let go.
Yeah.
So I've had some PR knots that I haven't had let go, but have looked really ratty after a fight. Where and it's like the finish on an FG knot, for example. Some people swear by hitches. Some people swear by bringing it back down on itself. Again, I just go hitches now because I have grabbed the spool on so many fish on that particular knot and how that's set up, and I've never had it fail on.
Yep. Excellent.
I mean, you could go on all day, but change your knots, and with not to mention an FG with hitches, I can tie them. So
yeah, and that's the advantage of it. Yeah, I know a lot of people who say, "Oh, yeah, I use a PR knot, but if I have to change a leader once I'm out there, I use FG knot because I don't want to do a PR on the boat." Yeah, connecting your leader to your lure, mate. What's your?
I use a chain knot. I know a lot of people use different stuff. Again, it's come through a long time ago. There was a few guys out in Australia from Jigging Master chasing big doggies, and they were doing this chain knot, and I was like, wow, that looks amazing. And I went right into it, and I saw this Japanese like expo on all these knots and stuff like that.
Yep.
And it was online somewhere, but I don't think it was YouTube. It was through a website, and they basically tied one of these knots onto a solid eye, and then had people coming up and tying other knots onto the other end of the line, and just would see which one would break first. And it just never broke. And that was the one knot. And everybody was pitting other knots against me, and it never broke. I just figured, this is the knot for me.
Yeah, it's what I use as well. So, it was Curious to see. All right, let's move on and talk about lures, mate, and perhaps how to fish them as well. So you mentioned you've got a bit of a penchant for big lures. So do you have three favourites that you always feel confident if these three are in the boat, you'd be pretty happy that you're probably going to be able to tangle with some GT?
So do you mean make of lure or as in company, or do you mean style of lure?
We can do either. Probably style of lure is as good as anything because at the end of the day, let's face it, there's lots of good brands out there, and particularly in Australia, we've got so many good handmade lures in this kind of genre of fishing as well. So let's maybe talk about the style of lure and how to fish it, and then you can take your pick about brands and models from there.
So I think the best way to go with lure is I'll say you have to have a popper in your bag.
Yep.
And if you were to have a popper in your bag, I would say have it between 135 and 150 grams.
Okay.
That's the sweet spot. So there is a lot of companies out there that do poppers up to 180 grams. You don't need them. It's too much for you to throw. And I know I said big lures, but they're the same bloody size, more or less. But yeah, I think to 150 to 135 is probably the best mark for a popper. So grab a couple of them in any of the brands. Obviously, we've got some of the best lures in the country that come out of here as far as timber goes.
Yep,
so,
absolutely. And mate, when you say popper, I mean, there's different styles of poppers. You're talking about a big cup face, gooseneck style thing that tears big holes in the water surface?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So, and then the other two, obviously, your stick baits. We have two different types of stick baits: floating stick baits, sinking stick baits.
Yep.
I would lean more towards a floating stick bait over a sinking stick bait.
Sure.
I'm not saying that either of them works better than the other, but we get into top water fishing to watch the
action. Yep.
So going to a sinking lure is just counter to what I want to do. I think in some areas they definitely work a lot better, fishing deeper pressure edges. Let's say the shallowest this edge you're going to fish comes up to 15, 20 meters.
Okay.
For me, where we live, you will catch way more Spanish mackerel than you will catch GTs with a sinking stick bait.
Okay. Yep. So the advice is typically GTs are going to come a fair way up anyway to take a surface lure. So if you want to avoid the Spaniards, you'll get less of them. Not none, but you'll get less of them on a top water surface.
Just so that the listeners can gauge this, I've had GTs hit a top water lure in 37 meters of water.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Yep.
So the bottom of the reef was at 37. So they've come up that far. Admittedly, I know there's a lot of bait in this place, and I have marked fish there in the past, and I was coming home after a day of not catching a fish, and I was like, oh, what a crap day. And I thought, oh, I'll just throw a lure over here. I know I've got the mark. You can't even, it's in the middle of the ocean. It's just a mark. And first cast, they came up and ate it.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. And I don't know how they see it or feel it, but they just seem to have such amazing awareness of what's going on the surface of the water, no matter how deep down they are.
I heard a stat, and I don't know the truth behind this, and if somebody knows, please message me, but I heard a game fisherman once say that a black marlin can see a 20-cent coin in the water at 100 meters.
Interesting. Yeah. There's a lot. This is one of my sort of areas that I'm a bit passionate as well. There's a lot about fish vision and fish eyesight that we don't know, but certainly the marlin have massive eyes and massive pupils, and some debate about whether that's because they need to be able to see because they move so fast that if they can't respond quickly, they're going to hit something. Right? Yeah. But anyway, look, that's really cool. So let's just go back through those lures. So I'm going to drop the sinking stick baits off the list just for the moment because the impression I'm getting is, mate, that you're going to fish the floating lures at all costs. And then if you're having a really quiet day and the fish are down deep, then as a last resort, you might stick a sinking stick bait on. Let's focus more on the surface ones. When would you choose a popper over a stick bait? Is there any kind of situation where one fish is better than the other?
So with poppers, typically you're probably going to be able to keep them in an area for a little bit longer. And although that might only be another 10 seconds, it might be the difference.
Yes.
So I typically, I'm shocking. 80% of my fishing, I probably fish with poppers. The time I will change lures regularly is if I catch a fish on a popper on an edge. When I go back, I'll throw a stick bait at it.
Right. Okay. Yep. Just to put something different in the water.
Yeah. Well, I've had it so many times where you go back with the same lure and you don't hook up just by default, because now how I run all my stuff, for me to change the lure is 2 seconds, just with the pliers. Bang, bang.
Cool. All right, mate, walk us through how you work the poppers. So is it just let it hit the water surface and then big sweeps with a pause in between, or what's your sort of typical?
Any lure that you're working, you'll find a rhythm which will work best. But if you can leave just a little, like a tiny little bit of slack in the line, it helps get the face or the nose of whatever lure you're using into the water.
Yep.
And it'll actually cut in better, and it'll work. The lure will work itself just by you simply moving it. But if you have that line tight all the time, you start pulling it, you're just going to pull the lure straight out of the water.
Yeah. Certainly get a much sharper pop and a lot more water thrown if you get that little bit of slack. And it's the same with the stick bait as well, right? If you don't get a little bit of slack, then it doesn't do the head dive and the side to side as well. It's not as effective.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons with poppers that I like using them so much is they make it noise.
Yes.
And the fish love it.
Yeah.
And it's, you have particular game boats where people will say, oh, black marlin love the sound of a Riviera 46 or something like that, which regardless of whether or not that's the case, but I definitely know fish are prone to sound.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But I think the Riviera 46 thing is a marketing ploy on behalf of the boat builder more than the actual science behind it. So
Bertram only catches blue marlin.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. All right, mate. Let's just have a quick chat about. Hey, folks, we're going to jump back into our conversation with Jack Avery in just a moment. But before we do that, just a quick reminder that at the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast, I've pumped out over 660 episodes, mostly interviews with Australia's top anglers, some of them where I do a bit of a random rant, I guess, but lots of interviews with Australia's top anglers. And those conversations have been recorded, edited, published, uploaded. They've been transcribed into a website with over 600 pages to create the largest resource for Australian lure fishers online. And all of that, of course, takes time and it costs a few dollars as well. If you get value out of what I do, I'd be incredibly appreciative if you showed your support by joining Team Doc Lures. The cost is less than what you'd pay for a pint of beer at your local once a month. And unlike that pint of beer, once you've drunk it, it's gone. But the knowledge and information you gain from Team Doc Lures will stay with you and help you catch fish forever. So help to keep the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast on air and, of course, take advantage of those audio masterclasses, members-only extended podcast editions, live streams, tackle deals, and more over at Team Doc Lures. That's team.doclures.com. Go and check it out now. But, folks, let's get back to our conversation with Jack Avery. Let's just have a quick chat about terminal gear as well, because a lot of these lures you'll buy without hooks. Some of them you buy with hooks, but you may want to change the hooks out. So what are your preferences in terms of the hooks that you put on your poppers? Singles, trebles, sizes, that sort of stuff?
Anybody planning a trip to come up here that doesn't live here should just use treble hook. I think you will maybe hook a fish that you go, oh, I really wish I had a big single in it. But if for people that are planning 2 or 3 trips a year, you will occasionally miss a fish with singles.
Yes.
But if you live here and you're doing it all the time, you can afford to miss a couple of fish.
Yes.
Like I don't use barbs, but if somebody was to plan 3 trips a year and had barbs on their hooks, so do you?
You wouldn't blame them, yep.
Yep. But I've been hooked so many times by myself that if I had barbs, I'd have to come in and go to hospital.
Yep. Really good advice. Do you buy barbless hooks or do you just crush them?
I buy barbless.
Yep. Excellent. All right, and hook sizes, mate? Because obviously that affects the lure action as well.
So depending on where you're going, so obviously BKK is different to, say, recorders.
Yep.
I have used recorders a lot. They're the only hook I actually use anymore. There's some other great hook companies out there, but I've just found, I just call them like a slippery hook. Like They seem to lose fish. Gignesis is another brand. They've got great hooks and they're strong. They're some of the strongest hooks on the market, but I just found them a slippery hook. Okay. So I stay away from them. But the GT recorders, like the main sizes are 4, 5, and 6. 5 is the middle of the run and will pretty much go on any GT.
Cover any lure. Yep, excellent. Good stuff. All right, mate, I'm going to start to bring this to a close. You've shared tons and tons of great information with us, but the one thing that we haven't explored yet is what to do once that fish has actually taken the lure. Because we all know that finding the fish, getting a lure in front of them, getting them to take it is one thing. Getting them to the boat, well, that's the other thing. So Give us some advice for playing a GT, particularly if you're in shallow water or whatever and you're in danger of getting reefed. What are your strategies for getting fish boatside? And particularly as you do a lot of this solo, I'm imagining there's no one there to drive the boat for you, so you've got your hands full.
Yeah, so we're really lucky with GTs that I don't think by nature of them they're a dirty fighter. I don't think they actively seek out a bommy like if you were to hook a big kingy. Like the kingies are going to try and get in the reef.
Yep.
If you get reefed, it's by bad luck and you can drum it up for that. If you can get them away from a pressure edge and then the current starts pushing it, because here, once you're away from an island, it generally goes pretty bloody deep.
Yes.
Sharks generally don't eat GTs. Like I've probably lost 3 GTs to sharks in 10 years. And the sharks that ate those GTs were monsters.
Right.
Like one was a huge bull shark and the others, I don't know what to, but they were like I saw the sharks on the sounder. They were enormous.
You can only hope that they got sick of terror from eating them, mate.
Yeah, exactly. So, no, the sharks aren't too much of an issue. If you can get away from the pressure edge, because your boat is naturally going to want to set back onto the rocks that you're fishing. So kick it in gear. You don't have to go crazy with getting off it. If you're in a deep area, if you've hooked them in a deep pressure edge, 25 metres, I'd say just stand there and
enjoy the fight.
Give it your best. But the gear we use, I mean, some of the stuff, you can run 20 kilos of drag over it. So that's plenty of pressure. And if you hook a real big one, if you start getting up, hooking fish over that 40 kind of kilo mark, for that first 2-3 minutes, you're just going to be a passenger.
Yep. Exactly. Is there a strategy you use that will knock them over more quickly?
Yeah, I reckon you get a shot. I reckon that first 5 minutes, you've got a good shot to get them bowled over pretty quick before they know too much of what's going on.
Yeah.
And as well, if they've those particularly big fish, I mean, you'll be able to get almost your head in their mouth. That's how big they are. So a lot of the time, they get hooked on the inside of the mouth. Yep. So they're spending a lot of time trying to actually get that lure out.
Yep.
And if you can get them when that part of it's ticking over, you can get them to the boat real quick. But if they cotton on to what's going on and want to take a bit of length, you're in for a pretty drawn out. I had that happen with Brooksy. I caught a really good sized fish with him. We weighed I think it went like 41 or 42 kilos. And I was laying on the rod on the gunnel on that flight. And I couldn't get up. And I typically can't shut up. I talk too much and I couldn't say a word. And he's there going to me, he's like, is this fish big? I'm like, shut up, Brooksy, because I can't move, let alone tell you if the fish is big. That should be the indication. And it's like 96 kilos. If I can't lean this thing up. So, that's when we got into a dogfight there. And I actually had to plane that fish up like if you would a marlin or a big tuna. Like, in gear, and I was just trying to get it up. But that's a kind of a very different...
extreme example, but yeah. Great story. Hey, Jack, it's been fantastic talking to you. I really appreciated the tips that you shared and some really great advice for anyone who wants to go out and chase GTs. Do you have any final pearls of wisdom before we bring this interview to a close for somebody who maybe hasn't done this before and is thinking about giving it a go? My advice to most people when they're thinking about GT fishing for the first time is book an appointment with your chiropractor before you go, because you're going to need it when you come back. But what's your advice, mate?
I think the biggest thing for me, for people that toss up or want to do these trips, is you're never going to catch them on the couch. If you want to go get them, you got to get out there, and it can be arduous. You can go out there for days, you're hot, it's awful, but then you come and have that, you come around to the back eddy of an island because it's too windy and you nail a 40 kilo GT, and I guarantee you the 3 or 4 days you just spent sweating your ass off out there, you forget about instantly. And that's the reward of fishing places like this. Like, we have got an amazing fishery on our door. I love seeing people go and get amongst it, but you won't catch them talking about them.
No, you get out there. Yeah. And you can watch as many YouTube videos as you like, listen to as many podcasts, read as many articles as you like. You're not going to learn, you're not going to experience it until you get out there and start casting lures. So, Jack, fantastic talking to you, mate. I really appreciate you coming on board. I know our listeners will get a lot of value out of this episode, and particularly those that are keen on fishing the Whitsundays for GTs. For all your advice and your wisdom, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
No problem.
Thanks for listening to the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. For free show notes, downloads, tools and resources, please visit our website on doclures.com. or consider supporting the show by joining Team Doc Lures to receive exclusive members-only episodes, tools and resources. But for now, tight lines and may the fish be with you.